Okay, everybody, we're going to give those coming from other meetings just a moment or two to join, and we'll start shortly. So if you could just bear with us while we're waiting for a few more to join, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, we'll make a start. I know there are a couple of others that have told me they're going to be here who will be joining shortly, but just to kick off for this fourth webinar in our series, which today is going to be focusing on professional service firms and the adoption of AI with some really great international perspectives that the speakers bring. I'd like to thank Carlo Cordasco, who has been kind of instrumental in pulling together the speakers and the focus of the webinar today, who's a research associate on the project and working on this area. And if you haven't seen the session last week, you can see the work that Carlo's been doing on in that webinar last week as well. So thank you for helping pull today together, Carlo. So very briefly, before I hand on to the speakers and our chair today, Bob Booth from IBM, just to say very briefly about the project for those that are new and haven't heard me speak about this, so apologies if you have before. The project that we're currently undertaking, that is funded under the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, is looking at the adoption, or the readiness rather, of AI in mid-tier firms. The firms that are perhaps too big to ignore but are challenged by not necessarily having the capacity to be able to go about implementing AI and incorporating it within the business as a matter of course. So the project itself has got three aspects to it. The first one is looking at academic insights, where we've been undertaking research and a series of deep dives into the sector, trying to understand what's going on and how firms are approaching the challenge of AI adoption and what it means to be AI ready. The second aspect of the project is very much focused on developing scenarios, looking at the future of the professions, particularly legal and accounting, and how we can challenge firms to think about what those futures might mean for the firm. So we recognize that the development of strategy and the nature of strategic planning in many legal and accounting firms is shorter than other industries and other sectors. So by using these futures and these scenarios, we're now able to offer a workshop where we can go into firms and actually support the senior leadership in thinking about what those futures might mean for their particular firm and their particular sector. So if you're interested in trying to understand more about the work that we're doing with respect to futures and scenarios, then absolutely we'd be delighted to hear from you. We are able to offer these as part of what we do, so we're not looking to charge. It is just part of our project, and we're looking to try and impact those firms that are willing and looking to try and engage to understand more about the future of the sector. The third part of the project is a series of design sprints. So I've talked about the phrase AI readiness. We're very much trying to support firms in becoming more AI ready and try and understand what AI and machine learning technologies can do for the firm, both in terms of the business of professional service, but also in terms of the practice of professional service. And using that design sprint methodology, we should have over the summer been hosting a series of these in person, but we're now trying to take them online and do them with individual firms. So again, if you're interested to understand more about what we can offer and how we can engage with your firm on the basis of the design sprint, please do reach out to us and we'll share details of that and how to engage with us after the webinar. So briefly, before I hand over to Bob to introduce the speakers and to give a few opening words himself, just to highlight the upcoming webinars that we've got. So next week, we will be looking at the realities of adoption of AI in mid-tier firms. So very much building on the focus of the project. We've got some great speakers from a variety of firms, and that will be chaired by James Falconbridge from Lancaster University Management School, who is a collaborator and co-I on the project. And the following week, one of the areas that we've been looking into and trying to kind of understand more about what the impact on next generation services are is around incubators, incubation and nurturing of technology in the profession. So again, a kind of fantastic lineup that we've got, chaired by George Martins from University of Sheffield, but again, a range of speakers from firms looking at the internal aspects of incubation and external incubators in different guises. And particularly interesting, an example there with Sophia about how we have tried to see a variety of firms coming together to support incubation. So a quite novel concept. So hopefully something over the next couple of weeks that will interest people. The link to register there. And if you are looking for that elsewhere, you can see it on our website. And again, we'll share details after today. So just quickly to hand over to Bob. Bob is a great friend of the project and has helped us in a number of ways over the past few months. And again, spoke in the previous webinar, so you can see him then. And Bob will be chairing today. So Bob, thanks for chairing, and I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So Bob Booth, I'm an accountant by profession, so I have a very much vested interest in this topic. And I think that the speakers today are going to talk about, firstly, the impact of AI in law, actually following the same themes that Tim talked about, the futures. So Stephen's going to talk about the futures and the impact of some of that technology of AI in the law profession. We're then going to get some academic insight from Dimitrios, and then Julian's going to give us the perspective of the practitioner for actually working in a firm, practically trying to apply these things. We're then going to move on to Sebastian, who will give us a sense of what impact these technologies have on the blurring of services, right? So AI allows people to be able to offer different services, and how are we seeing professional services work blurring to allow them to offer different services? And then finally, Tzameret's going to come and talk about actually it's the voice of the customer. So the impact of some AI, for example, in the insurance sector, which really starts to set the context for, I think, for what Sebastian talked around in terms of actually we need to provide different services. So what I'd like to do is hand over to Stephen, who's going to start us off.
Thank you. And I only have a very brief message on behalf of the Law Society of England and Wales, which is that we are determined, working collaboratively with other key stakeholders in the legal sector, to ensure that the UK is best placed on a global scale to promote, support, incubate, and benefit from the development of law tech. We are the professional body for solicitors. We have 180,000 members from the entire spectrum of the legal profession, from very large firms to sole practitioners, in-house, and also solicitors in not-for-profit organisations. In relation to this area, we're working closely and collaboratively with other key stakeholders, such as the British government and the Corporation of London, representing the City of London, the home of so many of the world's great financial institutions, but also recognising the significant contribution which law tech can make to the success of small and medium-sized firms and to lawyers operating in-house. We benefit from a very liberal regulatory environment in this jurisdiction. That's quite important in the area of technology interplaying with what are often, in many jurisdictions, restrictions on who can practice law and how they can practice it. We have very few restrictions here, and that has made it easy for technologists and other parties to collaborate closely in law firms of various kinds and in other settings with lawyers. And that we see as a key competitive advantage for this jurisdiction. We also have the benefit of a government which is strongly interested in the development of the sector, as illustrated, for example, by their establishment of the Law Tech Delivery Panel, which we played a key part in setting up. And that's designed to bring together a range of different stakeholders to help the government to create an environment where law tech is really successful and encouraged. And we can already see the work in that area coming through. Supporting that, we have produced a number of very influential reports, for example, on law tech adoption. And we've also collaborated with both major law firms and other institutions in relation to law tech development, the development of a good environment for law tech. So an example of that would be our participation in the establishment of Eagle Labs with Barclays Bank and a consortium of law firms to provide support and encouragement for the development of law tech. But for small and medium-sized firms, it's not so much about championing their success, but it's also about providing the support, materials, and encouragement that will really help them with their tech endeavors. And so we populated our website with a wide range of materials designed for those who are approaching this subject from the start, as well as those maybe who would like to cross-check their understanding against other knowledge and experience that they already have. So do visit our website. Do think of the Law Society of England and Wales as a natural collaborator in relation to this. And finally, please accept apologies from me that I'm not actually going to be here the whole time, so don't take it personally when later on in proceedings I depart. Back to the chair.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And if people do have questions for any of the panelists, feel free to drop them into the chat, and we'll collect them as we go. And anything that relates specifically to Stephen, we'll pick up and share with you subsequently. So I'll hand on to Dimitrios, who's going to share a really interesting piece of research of how AI has been applied in the legal profession.
Dimitrios, you're muted.
Yeah. Can't hear you, Dimitrios.
Yeah, I was muted by Tim, that I want to thank, I think. I think I was muted by Tim, but I want to thank him. And I want to thank Carlo and the organizers and Bob for taking me, for inviting me. Can you see now my screen, my slides?
We
Yes or
can.
no?
We can still see on the left-hand side, but we can see your slides. If you can minimize the left somehow, that'd be great. But yeah, we can see.
Yeah, we'll do. I just have to go to the full screen. So now, is it full screen?
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is present as fast as I can within 8 minutes. I'm setting up my alarm. I'm going to try to present a piece of research I conducted along with 3 computer scientists working in natural language processing, which was to add the international element to this, with predicting judicial decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. I'm going to present that very, very fast, without entering into the technical or other details. For those of you that are interested, the paper was published in the Peer Journal of Computer Science, and it's available. You can easily, if you just Google my name, you can, or the name of the paper, the title of the paper, you can find it very easily. It's accessible very easily, so you can find it along with the very, very interesting debate we had with the reviewer, especially the legal scholar, who was not convinced about what we were doing, which can shed a lot of light on what was going on. After presenting this kind of research, which I suppose also is to do a bit with the international aspect of this, since we targeted a major international court, I will present very briefly some challenges about what I think that means, on the premise that at some point, using machine learning and natural language processing will make it easier to predict some of the outcomes of various legal actors, including judges. So in this slide, I just make clear what we did. So artificial intelligence is a very, very huge area. We specifically focused on machine learning and more specifically, natural language processing. That is, it's the subfield of computer science concerned with interactions between computer and human natural languages. And the idea is to focus on the European Court of Human Rights. Here, this slide just gives you an idea of what that court is and what it does. For those of you that don't know it, I always tell my students at York, perhaps I haven't yet presented myself, I'm a lecturer in law at the University of York in the UK. I always tell my students not to mix it up with the Court of Justice of the European Union, which sits in Luxembourg. These are two completely separate courts, right? So we focused on Strasbourg and on human rights cases. Why did we do that? I'm going to just give you a very easy answer in 30 seconds, mostly because the structure of the judgments that the court hands down is very, very good, because it has sections and subsections, which means that you can automatically parse many of them, thousands of them, once you download them from the website. And that means that you can start checking each of the parts with the different textual components that it has for its predictive properties. So that was mainly the reason why we did that. It wouldn't have been so easy to do this with common law judgments. We would have needed to, say, the UK Supreme Court or some other court. It would have been less easy because we would have had to parse it down in more complicated ways, which would have taken time. So that's why we targeted the European Court of Human Rights, but also it ties in nicely with the fact that here we're talking about an international court, so we're not just focusing on the English and Welsh legal system, but with a legal system that also, interestingly, has been influenced by many, many legal cultures, both civil law and common law, and it has influenced many legal cultures, including common law. So what the court is doing in Strasbourg has had quite a bit of impact on what, say, British judges have been doing post-1998 or post-2000. So it's a nice test case. So what we did was engage in supervised learning. Again, for those of you that want to go into the technical details, just look up our paper and read it. What we're trying to do mainly is to train the algorithm by using training data. Then, and here I'll just use an analogy from exams. Say a student has an exam to pass, and the training data is just past papers along with answers. So you feed the student the data, and then you give him a new paper, and you ask him to perform on the basis of what they have seen up to that point. So that's how, more or less this works. So we have training data and then test data. You test the algorithm to see what it has learned. A bit on the experimental setup. It's technical, so I'm going to move on. Perhaps it could be interesting to see what happened when we go to the results. And the results were pretty good. Now, let me explain very, very quickly what we did. We extracted the text of the cases. Now, I already said that the cases are structured. So in the first section, you find the facts of the case. Then you find the legal arguments or a summary thereof. Then you find the discussion by the court, and then you find the outcome. So what we did was take the text out, make various assumptions about what's going on. So for example, that the facts of the case really correspond to a summary of what happened. The legal arguments of the parties really correspond to the briefs because we didn't have access to those. the arguments made by the parties really correspond to what the parties said, and then finally, the reasoning of the court really corresponds to what the judges are thinking. Of course, these are assumptions that it would take a lot of time to explain, even more time to justify. But making those assumptions, we come up with pretty encouraging results. So the idea is that, especially if we take a look at the facts of the case, they make, they do a pretty decent job in predicting the results. Now, one thing that I want to show here is that, okay, let me just go back. Oh, come on. One thing I want to be clear about is that this paper was just a proof of concept paper, right? So we didn't want to go too far into this. But I think that there are various converging areas of research in computer science and in natural language processing which show that to a certain extent, it is possible already on the basis of huge amounts of textual data, which can be processed along the lines I more or less tried to show very quickly, that various kinds of predictions about how judges and other decision makers will behave within the legal system will be commonplace. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean, for example, that we'll get rid of the lawyers and that all we need is an algorithm? No, I don't think so. And I think that the future is mostly what we're seeing right now. Already, lawyers, and I'm counting myself among them, we are collaborating with computers to do things, right? So before there was Westlaw, before there were databases, we would have to go into libraries and look our cases up into books, right? That doesn't happen now. We can search many cases automatically. So I think that this kind of algorithm is just going to be the next step in the evolution of the legal professions. If lawyers, to use an imagery, are already to a certain extent cyborgs because we are already collaborating with machines to do things, this is just the next step in this process. One second point I would like to stress is this. Okay, suppose humans know, and human decision makers know that using past data, some of their future actions can be predicted. Well, it seems to me that they could use that strategically, right? So they, and that's always a very interesting thing. I mean, it's always possible to humans to modify their behavior on the basis of knowledge they have about how others are going to predict what their behavior would have been given past performances. I think that this alone will make the landscape much more complex. I think that points to a limit to how these kinds of predictive technologies can function, but I think that this is not really a limit that will worry many lawyers who will be using those techniques. Lawyers, I think, and I'm closing with this point, lawyers standardly make a distinction between easy cases and hard cases. Easy cases are the cases that settle outside court, where it's very clear what the outcome of the case will be, and so on and so forth. It seems to me that predictive algorithms could be used to further draw that line down, which means, yes, legal argument, serious reflection will be needed for hard cases, roughly cases in which two complex arguments can be made, which, according to the canons of interpretation at a certain point in time, are mostly equivalent in strength. But many other cases, which perhaps now are thought to be hard cases, will, with the use of AI, become easy cases. So these perhaps will be settled outside courts, or settled via some other kind of mechanism. At least these are my initial thoughts about the subject, and again, I would like to thank you for having me.
Dimitrios is great. So a great application of use case that works really well. Piece around augmentation. Actually, there's something about causality of future behaviour that could be really interesting. Could be really interesting about criminal behaviour as well as because criminals, in my experience, are pretty good at application of AI. So it could be really interesting. And I mean, just was there a language challenge there in terms of the fact you got 27 different EU languages, or did you just pick some?
No. So that's the thing. So these were only English. So the Strasbourg court has only two languages, which are official, English and French. And we just didn't use French cases. So we stuck to English cases.
No, perfect. Okay. No, but very good. Very interesting, right? It's thought-provoking. I'm going to hand over to Giulio, who's going to give us an example of how this rubber hits the road in practice for lawyers.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thanks, Bob. I work at DLA Piper. That for those who know our law firm, it's not a small law firm. We are a very large law firm, but because we are very large, we are difficult to make changes because there are maybe too many brains that need to think. But despite of that, despite of the success of our firm, we took the commitment of completely reshuffling our firm in the coming years. We launched 2 years ago a project that is called Law Plus, where the plus means that we want to offer and our clients expect from us that we provide them something more than the traditional legal advice, some services that will be of support of the legal advice that we've been providing them during the last 20 years of history of our firm. I would quote what Dimitrios said, we are already lawyers or cyborgs, but that doesn't need to be read in a negative sense. Technology needs to be a support to lawyers. We have clients that are overwhelmed by repetitive requests, always the same requests by different people within the organization, which is time consuming, and they are dealing with the costs, with the cuts on their budgets, on their legal budget every year. So the risk for us is that we are not going to get that repetitive advice. Actually, we don't want that repetitive advice, and clients will go to other firms. But the alternative is to create solutions that can support our clients in repetitive work, keep a relationship with them, also changing our model of business in terms of remuneration. We're thinking about solutions that are based on a software as a service remuneration basis, so that they just pay a monthly fee for the usage of our technologies, our tools. But that's critical for us in order to keep the relationship with the client. Just to give you some examples, we created a tool that is called Prisca. Prisca is a chatbot that relies on an artificial intelligence system and is instructed by us. When I mean us, I mean people, me and people of my team, to respond to questions that at the moment relate to the GDPR and the regulations on trade secrets. But we are working with third-party suppliers, technology suppliers, to make Prisca adjustable to the needs of any client, in the sense that obviously we created a pilot case where Prisca was free and was providing responses on data protection matters and trade secrets, where the responses were not just the legal text of the GDPR, were responses that were tailored on what we were seeing in the market. For instance, I don't know, during the last months, the privacy issues related to COVID-19 were the hottest topics. Previously, the questions on Brexit. And so we tailored the responses of Prisca based on the metrics that we can see in the back system of Prisca, because we can see the number of queries that are addressed to machine. So that is adjustable. That's adjustable to on the procedures of a company. Companies, especially multinational companies, are very much bureaucratic in terms of internal policies, and just asking the right policy, just finding the right answer to a specific question might be very complicated, and therefore you not only you need to understand how what the regulation says, but also how that is applied by a specific group. So with our legal support, we are able to adjust the responses of Prisca in an artificial intelligence way. So you can address the question to Prisca in 10,000 different ways. Prisca will always give you the right answer. And keep a relationship with the client that when Prisca is not able to answer, will come back to us. That is not legal advice, and we put many disclaimers behind Prisca, but obviously that is a very powerful tool that can be, again, customized on the needs of the client. Another tool that we developed is called Notify. It's a tool that supports clients in the emergency of a data breach. So in a data breach circumstances, in the case of a data breach, you have 72 hours to understand what you need to do in terms of notification to the Data Protection Authority, communication to the affected individuals. Notify is a very simple spreadsheet that has some metrics behind it that the client cannot see, which in 10 minutes can give you an answer as to the obligations that arise from a data breach, which is crucial, not only because it supports the client in his decisions, but also because it allows the client to justify his business decision based on criteria that are those published by the European Data Protection Board and the other authorities and self-regulatory bodies within Europe. The third tool that I want to mention is an evolution of what we call Ascendant. We created, I think 10 years ago, a platform to support our clients during outsourcing projects. This platform supports all the negotiation, all the different drafting, can assess the level of risk of a specific clause that is included in a contract, can self-generate a basic contract if you don't want us to be involved. But because of the background information that Ascendant has been collecting over the years, Ascendant has so far 300 different contracts, 300 different deals that have been negotiated through the platform, and can, with the support now of artificial intelligence, be able to assess the risk of a specific contract in an automatic way to when the client just uploads the contract. So the client wants to understand whether that specific clause is in line with the business standards in a specific sector. We have this massive database that can give you a benchmark. So the artificial intelligence system will tell you whether or not the request from your counterparty is actually in line with market standards, or they are requesting something that is really out of the world and you should challenge it. Yeah, the extra mile that artificial intelligence allowed us to do is to do everything in an automatic way, while up until last year, the system was more mechanic and it was based on contributions from our paralegal. So you can see that in this way, we give a crucial support to the strategy, to the activity of our clients. And I believe that we are keeping, they find the solution useful, and we are not replacing humans with machines, but actually supporting humans with machines. That's it.
I mean, Giulio, it's great. Loads of the characteristics of a successful AI use case. So seeing pressure on routine activities and then using technology to be able to eliminate those and focus on value add. Blurring of products and services. So what was a service now coming into an AI product, and then seeing the professionals not only providing services, but also tuning the products. And indeed, you know, some aggressive early pricing. So fantastic examples of how it's used in practice. And actually, of course, all those things create price pressure in the market. So you're back to where you start. So sounds like you're doing all the right things to be able to progress. No, so, and actually that theme of sort of blurring of products and services is a perfect setup for Sebastian, who's going to talk about how professional services more generally are being impacted by AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Giulio, and thanks everyone for inviting me to this. I'm a big fan of the research themes of NextGen, especially service design. And thanks to everyone, of course, who has made it to this and is willing to live through my ramblings for the next 8 minutes. So I think what's really interesting about AI in professional services is that it's definitely starting to impact our business models. So really the core of what professional service firms are today. And what's fascinating for me about it is that it will definitely change the management playbook. So the way we run these firms. It's a different business if you're keeping smart people busy and you're billing by the hour, or whether you actually have technology as a critical delivery component and an increasing cost position really in your firm. So that actually, I think, is a main driver of the blurring of lines between different capabilities in those firms, and actually even looking beyond the profession. So towards technology firms, towards creative agencies, etc. So I think the whole concept of professional service firms is playing out on a much broader spectrum over the next couple of years. Maybe quick personal anecdote. So I have an operations consulting background. Less than a decade ago, I sold and led consulting engagements with major companies, where a large chunk of that first initial project phase was number crunching. Looking at spend data, looking at financials, contracts, material transactions, all that. If I look at it today, that work is gone. It has practically disappeared. It is almost fully automated. It is sometimes, clients are not willing to pay for it, or it's completely baked into our proposals. So that is already a very, very different game. And we are naturally leveraging AI technologies just to deal with that. And I think that will continue. We have a massive growth of corporate data. That volume is doubling roughly every 14 months or so, is one of the latest stats I read about it. And it is not just financials, it's also employee data, it's workplace productivity data, it is contracts. So it is really the underpinning of a ton of professional services. And actually, when I think about a lot of the work that our tax, legal, and accounting professionals do, they actually look at that same data. And that is also becoming much more accessible. Great example for that is a small startup in the UK called NGenB, which is developing something almost like a Bluetooth, I would say, for plugging clients and professional service firms together. Really great example of that. And I love mentioning that it has been born out of a lot of discussions at KPMG, and Seamus Ray is a fantastic ex-colleague who's leading that. Another driver I would say is AI adoption outside of professional services. So our clients are actually using it. And if I look at the latest stats from Gartner, it has grown by about 270% since 2015. So that's really crazy. I was also asked to put in some German perspective. So I think Germany's lagging a little bit behind when it comes to AI adoption. We have only about 6% of companies in Germany report to have some form of active AI deployment. Germans, however, I think in general have a tendency to talk our own country down when it comes to these things. So we do have some great startups in that space. Parliament is an AI-powered service communications manager. Then there's something like NeuroCat, which is a small startup that is using AI to actually check AI for compliance and security and compliance with regulation. Or you have Rasa, which is kind of a startup that has now moved to San Francisco, but born in Germany, and is and creating something like an HTML for natural language processing. A lot of firms are marketing AI platforms, so all of this is really, really happening. I think if financial services are anything like a similar predictor industry for ourselves, then we are looking at dramatic change. Robo-advisors in financial services. I don't know if you have ever used one. I'm not using one personally. I still don't trust it, I have to say, but maybe I will start doing that once my portfolio burns down. But they are predicted to have about 30% of all assets globally under robotic management, basically, by 2025. So that's not that far off. And it's actually pretty much in line with what Accenture is also predicting for our own industry. over the next 10 years or so. So I think when we look at these business models, coming back to that theme again, we have traditional business models coming from time and material, the billable hour. We have moved to fixed fee, to gain share, to managed services. Now, all of these business models are basically about being more efficient, taking on more risk. AI is important for us to use in that because it actually allows us to automate a lot of professional tasks that have been done before. And that is critically important as we move up these more scalable business models, because otherwise we can't keep ourselves profitable really and can't control for risks. We also have a new set of business models emerging, and Giulio gave some really nice examples from DLA Piper, where technology, data is really at the heart of the business model. So we're talking, I would say, smart managed services, that are not about labor arbitrage, but actually about providing the same or better quality at greater speed, or higher levels of expertise than a client could. It's software as a service, it's knowledge as a service, it's business processes as a service, it's virtual networks, even marketplaces. And all of these models are really powered by data and AI-related technologies, and bring down collaboration costs, transactional costs with our clients. And they're not just a dream, so this is really, really happening. And Julie's examples were great, and actually the numbers reflect that. So Source Global Research last year came out with a survey that was targeting specifically risk advisory related services. So a lot of the services that the Big Four are well known for, but also larger law firms are playing in, or specific consulting boutiques. And clients really said, what, we don't want this delivered as a classical project. We actually would like to have this as a semi-automated service, or even fully automated, with a clear indication that they will increase the sourcing of automated services in contrast to the traditional ones. So I think we have a huge blurring of the lines between the technology players and the more professional-based firms that is really happening. And that means that I think the whole identity of professional service firms needs to change. I think we need to ask ourselves, what kind of firms do we want to be? So it's playing a lot with our mindsets. A lot of professionals have spent many years educating for their job, going through very difficult educational programs and exams and all that to make it. And then spend more years building their expertise around it. And now some of that is being, or feels like it is being replaced by AI. I think it's being augmented really. And I think just like electricity didn't kill the screwdriver, but made for a super powerful force multiplying tool. Yeah? If you combine the two, an electric screwdriver, that's fantastic. It's probably the only way I can actually use a screwdriver. But it's the same. That I think that's happening for us. So what we need to do now. Sorry, Bob?
Just wrap up. Yeah, thank you. Just wrap up.
Yeah. Is that we will really need to rethink how we engage with clients using data and AI. Not just go for some collaboration tool, toss some tool in, but architect from the ground up, think about a different service design, which is naturally also one of your research themes for NextGen, and also find a different way of interacting with our ecosystem that is bringing all these ingredients together and is blurring the lines.
Absolutely. So we've perfect. So we've moving utilization average day rate to blurring of services, using technology, clients' expectations. Yeah. I think brings us really naturally to Tzameret, who's going to talk about a insurance example, and then we'll then take a number of questions which are beginning to appear. So voice of the customer, over to you, Tzameret.
Thank you. 1 second. Here you go. Slideshow. Right. So thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so I'm Tzameret, Dr. Tzameret Rubin from Loughborough University. It's going to be a challenge to summarize 20,000 words of document into 8 minutes, but I'll do my best. So I'm going to talk about the role of startups in InsurTech, and I'm going to provide some reference, next generation services as a reference. It's a research built on a concept called the knowledge space. So the bigger picture, where are we placed? We are under the industrial strategy umbrella, We got around £3 million to investigate the next generation services, legal tech or law tech it was called here, insurtech and accounting. We have several universities that work on that. Loughborough University, University of Sheffield, and University of Oxford. And here on the right, you can see some of our collaborators on this research project. So in Loughborough University specifically, it is a project called TechNGI, which is technological-driven next-generation services. In general, it is our mandate is to identify and map the range of opportunities for AI-based innovation, business processes, business models across different stakeholders within this ecosystem of insurance. Specifically, we want to create tools and framework to allow us to allow policymakers and practitioners to improve the development and adoption of AI technologies. Within that bigger picture, one work package within this research was to identify the key startups and key technologies, how central they are in this transformation of the industry, in this insurance industry. So I come from innovation studies. I'm an economist. The first time I'm researching in insurance industry. And when I started to map the information, the reports, the data that we have in this industry, it was enormous. There are many consultancies companies working in that industry, data companies, incumbent commissioned reports. It's very well mapped, this transition. So we were thinking, how can we contribute with our academic knowledge to create a framework that will last not only for the next year or two, to be for many years to come. So we had a data challenge that had two aspects to it. One is that technologies in this industry is moving really, really fast, as everyone was saying. So the problem is that we collect data, secondary data, let's say Bureau of Statistics or patent data that is 2 years or so, and it will take us a year or two to develop our research. Our framework, our output will not be relevant anymore. So the industry will move quite fast. So how do we catch up with this fast moving industry? The second problem that we had is the known proxy for innovation are too wide. So if, for example, you take a R&D investment, in-house outsourcing, buying off-the-shelf technology, it's not fine enough granularity to study these specific technologies that are used in this industry. And the second question that we had is this industry different than other industries in the service sector? So this is a question we needed to address. So key findings, 4 key findings. One is that we shift from companies view to knowledge space view. And what do I mean by knowledge space? So knowledge space comes from a network analytics science, and nodes represent domain of knowledge, and edges is the co-occurrence of those nodes. So here you can see the map, the global map of insurtech industry, and the nodes are colored here. So every color represents a cluster of knowledge, a knowledge space. And the edges is the connectivity, the co-occurrence of these nodes. 2 things to highlight from the knowledge space. One, how central AI is in insurance. So you can see in the middle, the AI cluster that is not only AI, it's machine learning, big data, and all the knowledge categories that coalesce. The second finding from our network analysis is that we were able to find 6 distinct clusters of knowledge. So you can see here the different colors that represent the different clusters. The second finding is that we are closing the knowledge space gap between investors' data and companies. So it means that we are able to benchmark the UK competitive advantage internationally. So for example, the investors' data, we can identify the type of investors that invest in those knowledge categories, where do they invest, and most importantly, what type of technologies they invest in. So again, it's not about the companies they invest in, it's about the technology. So once we map the knowledge space for the startup, and then we have the knowledge space for investors, we can compare the gap locally in different regions in the world. So that's another presentation of the global competitiveness. So it is the global specialization of different cities in the world that lead in insurance specifically. So here on the left, you can see the clusters of knowledge that we are able to map. And here in the circle, you can see the leading cities in the world in InsurTech. Two things to highlight from this graph. One is, One is you can see the AI cluster in red, how profound it is, how specialized many cities in the world are specialized in InsurTech, how they all work in this, specialized in the AI specifically, how central it is. The second point to highlight from this graph, it relates to the healthcare and health insurance. So you can see the American cities are leading, are specialized with healthcare. However, London does not. So we attribute that, as Bob would mention, in terms of customers' demand or customers' need, we attribute that to the difference between the private health system versus public health system in the US versus the UK. Another image about the global view and competitive advantage is we look at the startup life cycle. So it's a pyramid diagram borrowed from demographic studies, and we can see here the age of companies within InsurTech. So in green, you can see the InsurTech startups in the UK, and you can see that only a few companies 15 years ago were part of this industry, and the peak was 4 years ago, and then since then it was decreased. We call this peak the AI moment for adoption of this technology. So we can see that this industry is matured already. And if you hear VC talk about this industry specifically, you can hear the voices saying that it took 5 or 6 years for incumbents and startups to speak the same language. So startups are able to understand incumbents, and incumbents speak the language of startup. And you can see here the Amsterdam angle is maturing industry as well in decline of numbers. And Tel Aviv on the right, which tries, the numbers are on the rise still. It's very vibrant, small community in insurance. The third point I want to highlight is the cross-industry knowledge flow. So once we have realized that we can analyze this knowledge flow, the knowledge categories with insurance, we were thinking, why can't we look at other industries across the service sector? So we have an example in legal tech or law tech, and we were able to identify those geographical proximity of categories that create those clusters. And our next part of this research funding is to find how central AI to other services, and say, right, so people would assume that banking and insurance are not, the cognitive distance is not really far. However, it could be that the gaming industry or real estate industry is not really far as well from other industry. So we would like to map those cognitive distance and provide this framework for policy advice. And last point is the role of incubators and accelerators program for InsurTech startup. I know in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have a full discussion about, but in our angle, our finding, preliminary finding of this work, we found that actually accelerator play key role for investment. So here in this example, the nodes are startups and the edges are the funders, different types of funders. And we can definitely identify 5 distinct cluster of or bunch of companies. And the common denominator of all these clusters is that the companies that are there, they've been either are or been part of an accelerator. So now it's in the second stage of our research. We're going to dive deep into specific cases and understand why it is so important to be part of an accelerator. And that's it.
I have a million questions, right? I'm sure.
That is good.
Yeah, but it's really interesting blurring of industries and products. So, you know, if investors and companies can start to understand their behavior real time and go back to what we talked about before in terms of that actually might change people's behavior in terms of investment, what the companies do, like a million thoughts. So over to the chat, we've got a really good mix of questions. I guess we've got the same question actually this week that we had last week, which is actually the heart of this seems to be about data. I wonder if we can just ask Giulio, how easy was it to get the data you needed to be able to go ahead and do the AI products you developed?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't easy. It's the result of 5 years work. If you're referring to Ascendant, that is our platform on outsourcing projects, it's 5 years of work with the contribution of basically our lawyers in all the main jurisdictions where our offices are located. You need to be diligent because everyone mentioned the cultural shift that is necessary for the adoption of AI. That's fundamental because if you don't see the value added of using that technology, that is the value added in the long term, as we're seeing and we're appreciating now, then you're just thinking that you could do things faster in a traditional way, but then it's not a long-term approach. I think the element that we're struggling the most is to convey the advantage for people and why they need to do the effort of slightly changing the way they are working. They have been working during the last 10, 20 years, and why that is important for the whole company and for us as a firm. I think that's the crucial step for the future of our legal profession.
You know, you've actually started to answer a couple of more questions, which is good. So Kevin asked the question, you know, about the research and the reliability of the products, and Atif also talked about, you know, convincing clients about using these products. So maybe I can get Sebastian to comment upon, you know, which of these can you rely on as a professional? How do you know you can rely on the products that have been created from a professional perspective? And then how do you convince clients to apply them?
I think a lot of the products that are being created are first of all created by or through professionals. So, you know, ideally, and that's what we see happening in our own industry, a lot of professionals are now getting involved in these developments. So I wouldn't even say, you know, that these tools are just all coming in from the outside, but they're actually growing organically. I mentioned, for example, low-code, no-code applications that are really massively growing, and to me, a key tool in really changing the way we work and automating some of these things. So I think, you know, just like you would traditionally trust your own model in Excel, you're now placing your trust in some of these other tools. Now, obviously, I think there need to be mechanisms underneath that ensure that whatever is happening there in the background that you have no direct control over is working. And I think these are some of the fundamental challenges that firms are struggling with today. I mentioned EuroCAD as an interesting startup in that space, actually, targeting just that, you know, is an algorithm behaving the way it should be behaving, etc. So with clients, I would say it's even less difficult than with our own professionals. So actually clients are really asking for that. So like I said, I think many companies, client companies, are just really further ahead in terms of adopting this and being willing to embrace it. So they push that demand onto us to deal with it. And I think I don't really see clients struggling that much with it. It's maybe in less mature organizations where they have great difficulty dealing with professionals in general.
Yeah, no,
as service providers,
yeah,
but the larger ones.
Perspective there, Bob.
Yeah, please.
So in innovation studies, there's a concept called absorptive capacity. So whether the company has the ability to ask the question or be aware of the technology out there. So the problem with companies that do not adopt that or do not even start, they don't have the absorptive capacity. They don't have the knowledge in-house to ask the question or to know how to deploy this. I think that is one of the challenges, the absorptive capacity of small organizations.
Yeah,
no, that's good. And just last question then, in terms of your a question for Dimitrios, in terms of the sort of Lucas critique to machine learning in law, which I'm not fairly sure I understand.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I want to stick to one thing. I think I understand what Carlos's question is. Suppose we really are in a position to predict a lot of things reliably. Okay, then what? My guess is that this just, but that's just my take on this. To get back to the other question, the only reliable thing that will make a client invest in something is if you can really produce the goods. That's something to be seen, right? I know that I myself have collaborated with a legal firm to try to streamline some of the textual data and use some predictive algorithms to automate certain kinds of decisions. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? If the pudding can really be eaten, then I guess that things will snowball. Clients will be more willing to invest in this and so on and so forth.
I mean, just maybe to wrap up, what we see in the industry is actually predictions then get presented to professionals who then give an opinion on the prediction, because by definition we're experimenting. So when you combine, as Giulio talks about, professional expertise with the predictions and tune the predictions, that's when I think you start to see really power.
Exactly. I think that this is just right. So to get back to what I want to say, just one minor point. If I understand Carlos' point correctly, the question is, even if we can predict, then strategic behavior will not count much. Perhaps it won't. My take on this is that this will really move certain lines in a different way. Certain kinds of cases today are litigated. Other kinds of cases never reach court. Other kinds of cases are settled outside court, and so on and so forth. I think that what really reliable predictive AI will do, together with working in tandem with lawyers, is that this will further move those lines. So certain kinds of cases that today are litigated will just not be litigated tomorrow, because it will be so easy to predict what the outcome will be. Other kinds of cases will be litigated.
And I think sorry. That sort of talks to the overall theme for me, which is we're seeing a change in the nature of work. We're seeing an elimination of some of the routine. We're seeing the ability to be able to provide different services to customers who need different things, which make it a really interesting and exciting space. So I'll conclude there.
Yeah.
And back to Tim to wrap us up.
Okay.
Okay, so thanks very much for sharing that, Bob, and thanks for everyone in participating. I think another kind of interesting and enjoyable session. So again, thanks to everyone for attending. Just to remind people that the session next week, we will be focusing particularly on the realities of adopting AI in mid-tier firms. We've got a number of speakers from legal and accounting firms on both sides thinking about that challenge. So I hope you can join us then. We'll be uploading the video from this so you can reflect and review some of the comments of our speakers if interested to do so, and we'll be sharing the details about how you go about that after today. So again, thanks very much for everyone participating. Bob, thank you for sharing. Thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully we will see you all again next week. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye, thank you very much.